Today I'm going to introduce you to the concept of absolute value and the absolute value of a number and what it really means. So the first thing we need to know is, for absolute value, are opposites. And what does the term opposite mean? And mathematically it means that you've got two numbers that are the same distance from zero on the number line, but on opposite sides of zero. So what does that look like? So here's my number line, here's 0. So if this is my number 2, well, the opposite of 2 is going to be 2 spaces from 0 in the other direction. So it'll be 1, 2 spaces from 0. So the opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. Similarly, if I have two other examples here, the opposite of 5, if I put 5 up here, is going to be the same number of spaces in the other direction. So that would be negative 5. The opposite of, say this is negative 3.2. The opposite of negative 3.2 is going to be 3.2 spaces on the other side of 0. So I go 1, 2, 3.2. And there's the opposite of negative 3.2. So opposites, and then, let's see here. Then if I look at, I've got negative 5 is the opposite of positive 5. So you get the idea. Okay. So what is the absolute value of a number? Well, the absolute value is the distance from 0, from 0 on a number line. Oh, I don't want to use red. So it's always positive. You really can never have a negative distance. You're always going to have a positive distance. Excuse me. So the absolute value of A is these little bars here. That indicates the absolute value. And what that means, that's supposed to be an arrow. What this means is, absolute value of A. So a couple rules. If my number is positive, then the absolute value of A is just A. If A equals 0, then the absolute value of 0, or the absolute value of A, is 0. And if A is negative, then the absolute value of A is the opposite of A. So let's take a look at this. Let's say that A equals... So if A equals 4, then the absolute value of A equals 4, because A is 4. If A is 0, then A is 0. So A equals 0. The absolute value of 0 equals 0. If A is negative, so let's say A equals negative 7. Now this is kind of confusing because it almost looks like it says that the absolute value of is going to be a negative answer. But A equals negative 7. So the absolute value of A, of negative 7, what is the opposite of negative 7? That's positive 7. So what this negative sign means here kind of is the opposite of. So if A is negative 3, the opposite of A is positive 3. If A is negative 1.5, the opposite of negative 1.5 is positive 1.5. Now let's try some examples. So let's evaluate some expressions. What is the absolute value of negative 4? Well, what is the opposite of negative 4? The opposite of negative 4 is positive 4. This is kind of a tricky one. I've got the negative of the absolute value of 1/2. Well, my negative sign is on the outside of the absolute values, so I don't worry about that until I deal with the absolute value itself. So what is the absolute value of 1/2? That's 1/2. What is the opposite of 1/2? negative 1/2. So there's my answer. Okay, another type of problem you'll be looking at is solve the equation. The absolute value of x equals 7. So that means that x could be positive 7 or x could be negative 7, right? And why? Because if I throw a 7 in the absolute value signs, I get a 7. And if I throw a negative 7 in the absolute value signs, I get a positive 7. How about this one? The absolute value of a number is negative 3.2. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we always say that the absolute value, this always has to be positive? So as it turns out, there is no solution. Because my absolute value always has to be positive. So let's just try one more. What if I had the absolute value of x equals 4.5? Well, that means that x equals... So what this means is x could be positive 4.5 or x could be negative 4.5. All right, that is pretty much wraps up our lesson for tonight, and I will see you in class in the morning. See ya.